Ava Whitmore was a woman accustomed to moving through life without friction. Born into a dynasty of wealth so old it predated electric lighting, she'd been raised in an estate where the marble floors gleamed like water and the help was trained to be invisible. At 28, Ava lived in a high-rise overlooking Central Park, her days occupied by charity luncheons and art auctions, her nights by galas where conversations were currency, and a surname like Whitmore could still buy silence. She was beautiful in a cold, pristine way. Porcelain skin, pale blue eyes, honeyed hair that curled at the ends just so. Everything about her screamed control, from her tailored cashmere coats to the discreetly monogrammed notebooks, where she chronicled investment opportunities and the failings of acquaintances. Yet, for all her privilege, Ava Whitmore harbored one constant from her childhood to her adulthood: Marla Davis. Marla had come into the Whitmore household when Ava was 6 years old, hired to be the nanny after a scandalous string of governesses had fled the estate. A tall, striking black woman with skin like deep mahogany and a voice that carried both steel and lullabies, Marla never cowered, never flinched. And she never left. Even when Ava aged out of nannies, Marla stayed on as an unofficial personal assistant, housekeeper, and, if anyone asked, a longtime family retainer. In truth, Marla was the only person who ever spoke to Ava like a human being. It was during a Tuesday afternoon, a dull, gray sort of day when the city smelled of wet concrete and disillusionment, that Ava's curiosity took root. She had been working from home, half listening to a financial analyst drone through market trends on a Zoom call when she heard Marla's voice drifting from the hallway. "Yes. No, I'll have it. I told you, by Friday. They don't know a thing." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Ava's pulse quickened. It wasn't the content of the sentence, but the tone. Marla's voice, usually calm and impenetrable, held a tremor. Ava rose, moving silently to the door, careful not to be seen. She heard the click of a phone shutting off, footsteps down the hall. Ava returned to her desk, though she no longer heard a word the analyst said. The logical thing to do would have been to ask Marla directly, but Ava couldn't. It wasn't how things worked between them. There were layers of unspoken understandings, of debts neither fully acknowledged. Ava owed Marla more than she could articulate, but that didn't dissolve the gnawing sensation in her gut. That night, over wine with her usual circle of bored, beautiful socialites, Ava mentioned it offhandedly. A chuckle, a dismissive wave, and then one of them, Claudia, sharp and heartless, murmured, "Well, you know how those people are. Always working some side hustle. Be careful. It'd be a shame if she were stealing from you." Ava bristled at the casual prejudice but said nothing. Still, the seed was planted. By Thursday evening, Ava had decided. She would follow Marla. She told herself it wasn't distrust, but curiosity. A need to confirm, to protect herself from potential betrayal. Maybe even to prove Claudia and the rest of them wrong. And so when Marla slipped out after her shift, an old denim jacket replacing her crisp uniform, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, Ava waited 10 minutes, then took her coat and followed. The air outside was thick with mist, city lights turning the haze gold and gray. Ava's car waited at the curb, but she ignored it, pulling her hood over her hair and following on foot. Marla moved quickly, navigating side streets with a familiarity that unsettled Ava. She crossed neighborhoods Ava had never set foot in, past dimly lit storefronts and apartment blocks where paint peeled from windowsills. Ava felt like an intruder, a ghost in a world not meant for her. She kept a careful distance, enough to see Marla turn down a narrow alley lit by a single flickering bulb. Ava hesitated at the entrance, heart pounding, and then, gathering every ounce of her inherited arrogance and reckless curiosity, she stepped forward. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The alley swallowed Ava whole. The further she stepped, the more distant the polished world of penthouses and charity galas became. The narrow path reeked of damp stone and old metal. the walls on either side scrawled with faded murals and stubborn graffiti, declarations of love, grief, and defiance in colors dulled by time. The hum of the city dulled here, replaced by the echo of Ava's footsteps on cracked concrete and the occasional hiss of a leaking pipe overhead. Ahead, Marla moved with surprising speed for a woman of 53. Her tall frame cut through the shadows with certainty, as if the darkness itself parted for her. Ava tightened the belt of her designer trench, mindful of every sound she made. She felt ridiculous, a ghost of privilege trailing a woman who had raised her. But something gnawed at her now, a need sharper than curiosity. As Marla rounded a corner and vanished behind a rusted iron door, Ava quickened her pace. She reached the doorway just in time to catch it swinging closed. No sign, no name. Just a weathered brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. She pressed her ear against the metal, straining. Inside, voices, low, urgent. A child crying, a woman murmuring in Spanish, a man's hoarse whisper. And then Marla's voice, steady as always. "We don't have time. He's bleeding too fast. Hold him still, baby. I need the kit." Ava's breath caught. She pushed the door open an inch, peering inside. What she saw made the bottom drop out of her stomach. It wasn't a drug den, as Claudia's venomous suggestion had made her fear, nor some backroom gambling operation. It was a makeshift clinic. The space, barely the size of a modest apartment, was crammed with battered examination tables, cabinets overflowing with supplies, and folding chairs lined against the wall. A single overhead lamp cast a pallid glow on the scene. A young man lay on one of the tables, his shirt dark with blood. Beside him, a girl no older than 15 clutched his hand, tears streaking her face. Marla stood at the center of it all, sleeves rolled up, her powerful hands steady as she worked. Ava felt her knees weaken. This wasn't some side hustle. This wasn't theft. This was something else, something ferocious and undeniable. She watched as Marla cleaned the wound, murmuring soft words in a language Ava didn't recognize, stitching flesh with the calm of someone who had done this 100 times before. The room was filled with people Ava had never seen, brown and black faces lined with exhaustion and fear, mothers clutching sick infants, elderly men with sunken eyes, teenagers with bruised faces and old sneakers. None of them noticed her in the doorway. None of them flinched when Marla spoke. When Ava finally stepped inside, a woman turned and gasped. "Who's that?" she demanded. Marla looked up. The second their eyes met, Ava saw the flicker of recognition, then something else. Disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. "I told you not to follow me," Marla said, voice low and laced with something sharp. Ava swallowed. What is this?" "A place you were never supposed to see," Marla answered. She gestured for one of the teenagers to continue tending to the injured man and walked toward Ava, wiping her hands on a cloth darkened by blood. Ava felt like a child again, small and foolish. "I thought," Ava began. Marla cut her off. "You thought what? That I was stealing, selling drugs, planning something against you people?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Marla's voice softened, but the disappointment remained. "I've worked for your family 30 years, raised you like you were mine, and yet the minute you hear one thing out of place, your instinct is to follow me like a criminal." Ava's throat tightened. "I didn't mean this," Marla gestured to the room, "is what I do after cleaning your damn marble floors. I run a clinic for people your hospitals turn away, undocumented workers, homeless veterans, kids thrown out for who they are. You wouldn't know, because your world makes sure you don't see them." Ava's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marla's gaze was steady. "Because it's safer when your kind don't know. Because the last time someone found out, 2 of my people disappeared. Because I've lived long enough to know that trust from your world is a currency with an expiration date." The weight of her words landed with merciless precision. Ava glanced around the room. A woman gently rocking a child, an old man gripping an inhaler, a boy wiping blood from a friend's face. The magnitude of her ignorance made her stomach churn. "I didn't come here to betray you," Ava said quietly. "I don't even know why I followed you." Marla sighed, years of exhaustion in the sound. "Because you were raised in a house that taught you to fear what you don't understand, and no matter how different you think you are, that fear still lives in you." Ava said nothing. There was no defense, only a gnawing shame. "Now," Marla said, turning away. "Either you leave or you help." Ava didn't move. She stood frozen in the doorway, her breath shallow as the weight of Marla's ultimatum settled over her. Leave, and return to her manicured life of silk upholstery and curated dinner parties, or stay and step into a world she'd been raised to ignore. For a long, stretching moment, the only sounds were the low murmur of voices and the occasional soft moan from the wounded man on the table. Ava's throat tightened. She had faced oil magnates, venture capitalists, and art brokers worth billions, but this room of forgotten people, and the quiet authority of a woman she thought she knew, shook her to her core. "I'll help," Ava said, her voice thin but steady. Marla didn't smile. She only nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "Wash your hands," she instructed, pointing to a narrow sink in the corner, "and tie that hair back. No one needs your designer strands in an open wound." Ava obeyed without a word. The cold water stung, her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink barely recognizable. Hair disheveled, eyes wide, face pale. She looked like someone unmoored, torn from the safe shore of inherited power, and left adrift in uncharted waters. Marla tossed her a pair of latex gloves. "Come on, we've got work to do." As Ava crossed the room, she caught furtive glances from the others. Wariness. Resentment. Some recognized her face from society pages and charity galas where the Whitmore Foundation cut oversized checks for photo ops while refusing to fund clinics like this. The young girl seated beside the injured man stiffened as Ava approached. "It's okay, Nia," Marla reassured the girl gently. "She's with me, for now." Ava knelt beside the makeshift table, the scent of antiseptic and blood thick in the air. The man's wound, a jagged gash across his side, had slowed its bleeding but needed stitching. Ava fought a wave of nausea. "Hold here," Marla instructed, placing Ava's gloved hands near the wound. "Press firm, but don't suffocate him." Ava complied, and for the first time in years her hands felt useful, not signing checks, not sipping vintage wine, not scrolling through vacant conversations on a silk sofa, but here, holding flesh and gauze and responsibility. "How did this happen?" Ava asked softly. "Factory accident," Nia murmured, her voice hoarse from crying. "They locked the doors to keep us working overtime, said if we left before quota, we'd be fired." Ava stiffened. She knew about these factories, textile plants run through shell companies her family had invested in years ago, touting job creation in underserved communities while pocketing record profits from labor abuses. "I didn't know," Ava whispered. Marla snorted without looking up. "That's the privilege talking, baby. You didn't have to." Ava wanted to protest. She wanted to say that she wasn't like the others, that she donated, volunteered, smiled for the charity newsletters. But the words curdled in her throat. In this room, those things meant nothing. "Pass me the sutures," Marla ordered. Ava obeyed. They worked in silence, Marla's hands swift and certain, Ava's trembling but growing steadier. One by one, the people around them became less like statistics and more like faces. A middle-aged woman with deep burn scars. A boy with a crooked nose, barely 16. A girl cradling a baby no older than 6 months. "This isn't charity," Marla murmured later as they cleaned up the last of the bloodied cloths. "This is survival. They come here because there's nowhere else. No insurance, no papers, no rights. Places like your father's hospitals turn them away, and if the city finds out about us, they'll shut us down." Ava's throat ached. She thought of the empty guest suites in the Whitmore estate, of the tens of millions wasted on art collections and vanity projects, of the countless board meetings where phrases like revenue optimization justified the bleeding of neighborhoods like this. "Why do you stay?" Ava asked. Marla's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Because somebody has to. Because the world your family built doesn't leave people like me many choices, and because you don't fix a rotten house by changing the curtains. You tear out the damn foundation." Ava said nothing. The words lodged in her chest like splinters. "Go home now," Marla said. "We'll talk later, if you're serious." Ava hesitated. "I am." Marla sighed, studying her for a long, heavy moment. "Then be ready. The truth about this city, about your family, it doesn't come clean, sweetheart. It comes raw, and once you see it, you can't go back." Ava nodded. For the first time in her gilded life, she felt the edges of a different kind of power, one not bought or inherited, but forged in quiet, desperate places, and she wasn't sure whether to be terrified or grateful. The ride home felt like a descent into another dimension. Ava sat in the back of her car, the leather seats cold against her skin, the city lights blurring past the window in streaks of gold and blue. But nothing outside felt real anymore. Not the sleek high-rises, nor the valet-stationed entrances, nor the midnight diners packed with trust fund kids chasing one last thrill before morning. Her hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic. When she arrived at the penthouse, she didn't even notice the doorman's startled expression as he opened the door for her. She walked past the Carrara marble foyer, past the priceless paintings, past the grand piano no one in the family played. Upstairs, Ava poured herself a glass of bourbon. She sat in silence, staring at the skyline she once considered beautiful, now just cold glass and power. But sleep wouldn't come. At dawn, Ava opened her laptop and began pulling up company records, contracts, donor lists. She searched through archives of her father's old hospital acquisitions, digging until her eyes blurred. What she found gutted her. Year after year of legal settlements buried under confidential clauses. Nonprofit clinics closed after Whitmore Foundation acquisitions. A string of allegations from immigrant workers, injuries ignored, deaths dismissed as accidents, settlements paid in cash to avoid headlines. And buried deep within the spreadsheets, the textile factory from the night before. Its official owner? A holding company belonging to Whitmore Industries. Ava's stomach turned. She remembered being 16, visiting that factory once on a PR tour, posing for photos with wide-eyed workers too polite to speak. She'd thought them grateful, called it humbling, in an interview afterward. The memory made her skin crawl. And yet, what rattled her most wasn't the documents. It was the realization that she'd never asked, that it had taken following Marla through a dark alley for her to finally open her eyes. By noon, Ava was in her father's office. Gerald Whitmore was a man carved from stone, tall, silver-haired, the kind of face that adorned magazines and oil paintings. He looked up from his desk, brows raised. "To what do I owe the honor?" he asked. Ava tossed the printed factory reports onto his desk. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. "I went digging," Ava said, voice cold. "I followed Marla last night." That made him sit back. "You what?" "She runs a clinic. For the people we destroy to keep this family rich." Gerald exhaled slowly. "Ava, you have no idea what you're meddling with." "No, you made damn sure of that." He gestured toward the windows. "This city doesn't run on charity. It runs on leverage, on people knowing their place. You think your ancestors built this fortune being kind?" "I think they built it on blood," Ava said quietly. "And you're still cashing the checks." For the first time in years, a sliver of fear flickered in Gerald's expression. "You'll leave this alone," he ordered. "You'll go to that gala tonight, smile for the cameras, and remember who you are." Ava shook her head. "I know exactly who I am, and for the first time it makes me sick." She turned to leave. "Walk out that door, Ava," Gerald warned, "and you're no longer my daughter." She paused, hand on the doorknob. "Maybe I never really was. When she stepped into the hallway, it wasn't fear she felt, but a clarity so sharp it burned. That evening, Ava returned to the clinic. Marla was there, sorting supplies, her face wary when she saw her. "I didn't think you'd come back," Marla said. "I'm not here to ask permission," Ava replied. She pulled out a folder, thick with records. "I have names, contracts, proof, not just about the factory, about the hospitals, the shutdown clinics. The bribes." Marla's eyes narrowed. "And what do you plan to do with it?" "Burn it down," Ava said. "Not just my father's legacy, the whole system." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marla smiled, not wide, not soft, but with a fierce pride Ava had never seen before. "Good," Marla said, "because it's about damn time." The next 48 hours felt like the earth tilting on its axis. Ava's decision to expose her family's hidden atrocities was reckless by every calculation she'd been taught to make. A betrayal of bloodlines, inheritance, and the fragile code of silent complicity that governed families like the Whitmores. Yet, for the first time in her privileged, airless life, she felt like she could breathe. And predictably, the rumors began. It started subtly at first, a text from Claudia dripping with venomous concern. "Everything okay, darling? Hearing strange things about you slumming it in Harlem must be a mistake." Then a phone call from her family's attorney, Leonard Garrison, his voice all fake warmth and legal warnings. "Ava, my dear, you must understand. The holdings you're digging into are structured through multiple layers of ownership. Unwinding them publicly could trigger investigations, lawsuits, reputational damage on a scale you cannot control." "That's the idea," Ava replied and hung up. By morning, the vultures were circling. News of her supposed erratic behavior had made its way to gossip blogs. Anonymous tips whispered of drug use, mental instability, romantic entanglements with dangerous radicals. The predictable smear campaign designed to discredit inconvenient women who refused to stay decoratively silent. But worse than the press were the whispers from her own circle. Ava attended a charity breakfast out of obligation, only to be met with tight smiles and glances traded like currency. "She's lost her mind," murmured one heiress to another over lemon water. "She's always been fragile," added a socialite Ava had once lent a couture gown to, as though Ava weren't seated just a table away. By midday, Ava's phone lit up with a call from Detective Marcus Hayes. "You've made some powerful enemies, Whitmore," Hayes said without preamble. "Your name came up in 2 flagged financial transactions this morning. Both attempts to purchase non-existent narcotics under your bank accounts. Someone setting you up for a fall." Ava's stomach dropped. "Can you trace it?" she asked. "I can try," Hayes said. "But it won't matter. By the time we prove it wasn't you, the narrative will have taken root. This city forgives thieves faster than it does traitors to their class." Ava looked out at the gray skyline, her reflection faint in the glass. "I don't care," she said. "Let them come." That night, Marla called her with worse news. "They're coming for the clinic," Marla said, voice low and tight. "Got word through our people at City Health. Emergency inspection ordered for tomorrow morning. You know what that means." It meant shuttering, raids, medical equipment confiscated. And more than likely, ICE showing up under the guise of health code enforcement to round up the undocumented. Ava's blood ran cold. "We can't let that happen." "We won't," Marla said. "But I need you to understand, girl. This isn't charity anymore. This is a war. The people coming for us don't play fair." Ava closed her eyes. "What do you need?" Marla hesitated for a breath, then spoke. "We need leverage. You said you had names." "Documents." "I do. Then it's time we use them." Ava glanced at the folder on her desk. Names of politicians, hospital board members, CEOs who'd profited off shuttered clinics, unpaid settlements, and bribed regulators. She thought about the decades of pain those papers represented. Lives bulldozed for profits she'd once proudly toasted to. "Meet me tonight," Ava said. "We burn it all down." Marla's voice carried a quiet satisfaction. "Welcome to the fight." But before they could move, the phone rang again. It was Claudia, her tone sugary sweet and lethal. "Ava, darling, I just wanted to warn you. There's a gathering tonight at your father's estate. Everyone's talking about you. Gerald's planning an announcement. Something about disowning you for conduct unbecoming. Thought you should know." Ava's jaw clenched. "Thank you, Claudia." "Oh, it's no trouble. After all, it's always good to know when you're about to be executed in polite company." She hung up. Ava stared at her reflection. The tight, polished socialite was gone. In her place stood a woman unmade and remade in the space of days, one no longer tethered to a name, a fortune, or a gilded lie. She picked up her phone and texted Marla. "Change of plans. I'm going to the estate first, alone." It was time they saw her, not as a daughter, not as an ornament, but as the storm she had become. The Whitmore estate shimmered like something carved out of a fable. Ava's childhood home, if you could call it that, sat at the crest of a private hill outside the city, acres of manicured grounds unfurling in every direction. The mansion itself was a monument to excess, columns tall as trees, imported stone, a chandelier rumored to have once belonged to a French queen. It always felt less like a home, and more like a museum dedicated to a family's insatiable appetite for control. Tonight, the estate glowed with soft amber lights. Black cars lined the driveway. A valet in white gloves opened Ava's door with a practiced bow. "Miss Whitmore," he said, voice hesitant. She ignored him, her heels striking the marble path as she made her way toward the grand ballroom. Inside, the usual crowd had gathered. A blur of tailored suits and designer gowns, the air thick with expensive cologne, and the hum of whispered speculation. Crystal flutes clinked against one another. Waitstaff moved like shadows through the room, and at the center, as always, was Gerald Whitmore. He stood at the far end of the room, flanked by men whose names were inked on skyscrapers and women whose faces adorned social pages. A glass of scotch in his hand, Gerald was laughing, the sound like a blade sliding between ribs. Ava walked straight toward him. The crowd parted as she passed, some startled, some pitying, others thrilled at the scent of scandal. When Gerald saw her, his expression didn't falter. "Ah," he said, raising his glass. "The prodigal girl arrives." Ava stopped a few feet from him. "I hear you have something to say about me tonight." Gerald's smile was sharp as cut glass. "Only that you've lost your way, darling. That the pressures of our world can sometimes be too much, and that while it pains me, I must distance the family from reckless choices." He gestured around them. "These people, they build this city, they maintain order. And you'd throw it all away for what, some bleeding hearts in a basement?" The room's murmur swelled. Ava took a breath. "I didn't lose my way, Father. I finally found it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slender folder. Not the thick stack of evidence Marla had, but something else. Something carefully chosen for tonight. "I know about the clinic raids you funded, about the factories running double shifts with locked exits, about the hospitals turning away the sick because they didn't carry the right insurance." The crowd's murmurs grew sharper. Ava's gaze never wavered. "I know you paid off city inspectors, bought out journalists, buried deaths in settlements. I know you made your fortune on the suffering of people you deemed disposable." Gerald's eyes flickered for the first time. "You think anyone here cares about that?" he sneered. "They knew. We all know. It's how the world works, Ava." "Not anymore," she said. She lifted the folder. Inside are transfer records, financial trails, emails, enough to end careers. And copies of every one are already with investigative reporters, labor lawyers, and city prosecutors. By dawn, they'll be public record. A stunned silence fell over the room. "No," Gerald said, his voice tightening. "You wouldn't. You don't have it in you." "I didn't," Ava admitted. "But I spent too many years watching people like Marla risk their lives for scraps while we sat here counting the silver. And I realized, the difference between you and me isn't blood. It's who we choose to protect." She stepped closer, her voice a blade now. You protect power, I protect the people it crushes. A slow, deliberate applause broke out behind them. It was Marla. She stood in the doorway of the ballroom, no longer in a worn denim jacket, but in a simple, elegant black suit. She looked like she belonged there, like she owned the ground she walked on. Behind her, flanking the entryway, were several faces Ava recognized from the clinic. The boy with the crooked nose, the mother with the burn scars, the factory worker whose life they'd saved. Not hiding now, but standing tall. Gerald paled. You brought them here? He hissed. I didn't have to, Ava said. They came for themselves. The room had split, half watching in horror, half in something like awe. Ava turned to the crowd. You all built your fortunes off the backs of the invisible. Tonight the invisible see you. She dropped the folder at Gerald's feet. Watch how fast your world burns. And with that she walked away, past the marble columns, past the painted ceilings, past the house she would never set foot in again. Outside, Marla joined her. Not bad, Whitmore, she said, a quiet pride in her voice. Ava glanced at her. It's Davis now. Ava Davis. Marla smiled. Welcome home. By the time dawn peeled over the city, the Whitmore name was no longer a shield. The first headlines hit just after 5 a.m. Front-page banners from outlets that had long hesitated to touch the family. Whitmore empire built on human exploitation, leaked records reveal. Subheads followed swiftly. Illegal factory conditions, racially discriminatory clinic closures, ties to government officials emerge. And then the photographs. Images of emaciated workers with chemical burns. Families turned away from emergency rooms. Emails laced with quiet contempt. If they can't pay, they can die elsewhere. Ava's name was there too, not as a scandal, but as a whistleblower. Social media erupted. Protests formed outside Whitmore hospitals and factories within hours. Politicians who had once toasted at Gerald's table scrambled to issue statements of shocked indignation. And for the first time in 3 generations, the Whitmore estate gates remained firmly shut. Inside Marla's clinic, which had been emptied hours before city inspectors could storm in, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by exhausted volunteers. The room still smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat, the walls stripped bare of supplies. Marla paced, her phone buzzing with new alerts every minute. They're spinning it, Marla muttered, scanning a new message. Whitmore lawyers already claiming it's a smear campaign from political rivals. Ava leaned her head back against the wall. Let them. The receipts are out there. Every document has 3 sources now. 3 different papers. 3 different countries. Marla chuckled. Look at you. 6 days ago, you didn't know what a labor injunction was. 6 days ago, I thought my biggest problem was getting seated next to Claudia at the fall gala. One of the young men, Jamal, the boy with the crooked nose, approached with a paper in hand. It's not just them, Ms. Davis, he said. After your leak went viral, folks from other neighborhoods sent their own records. Old pay stubs, hospital rejections, eviction notices tied to Whitmore's real estate group. We're sitting on a mountain. Ava looked up, her pulse quickening. Enough for a class action? Enough for 10, Jamal said. Ava felt a sharp thrill, not of revenge, but of raw justice, the kind that burned systems down. Good, Marla said. It's time to stop fixing the broken. Time to dismantle the machine. Ava knew what that meant. The Whitmores weren't unique. They were just one piece of a rotten puzzle that spanned banks, hospitals, universities. An old money syndicate hiding in plain sight. Where do we start? Ava asked. Marla pointed to the stack of testimonies. By making sure this doesn't stop with your father. Every name, every deal, every life they buried for a profit. We bring them into the light. Ava picked up a folder and opened it. A boy denied treatment after an accident at a Whitmore-owned worksite. A black nurse fired for refusing to turn away uninsured patients. A single mother forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement after her son died of untreated pneumonia because he lacked insurance. Pages and pages of lives discarded like debris. Ava's throat tightened. They were invisible, she whispered. Marla's voice was soft now. Only to people who chose not to see them. A notification buzzed on Marla's phone. She glanced down, and her expression shifted. City Council's calling an emergency session, Marla said, a slow smile forming. You started something they can't smother this time. Ava let out a shaky breath. I'm not stopping. I know. They worked through the morning, compiling cases, gathering witness statements, connecting families with attorneys. By afternoon, Ava was on a live feed with 3 civil rights organizations. She saw faces of lawyers, community leaders, labor organizers, none of whom would have given her a second glance a week ago. But here, she wasn't a Whitmore. She was the girl who broke the lock. And then a surprise. A video statement from Ava's half-sister, Elise, the one who had always played by the rules, the loyal socialite wife to a venture capitalist. She appeared on screen, her face pale but defiant. I cannot in good conscience remain silent, Elise said. What our family has done is indefensible. Ava was right. The ripple effect was immediate. Others followed. Distant cousins, former board members, even a Whitmore Foundation trustee. Marla glanced at Ava, her brow raised. Didn't see that coming. Neither did I, Ava admitted. But it meant something. Not absolution, not yet. But cracks in the fortress. And somewhere, Gerald Whitmore watched his empire crumble in slow, merciless pieces. By the 3rd night, the city felt like a different animal. Every news ticker in Times Square flashed the story. Whitmore dynasty implodes amid scandal. Talk show hosts dissected Ava's speech at the estate like it was a national address. Protesters gathered not just at Whitmore businesses, but at City Hall, hospitals, universities, places where other old names lurked in marble lobbies. And everywhere Ava went, people stared. Some with admiration, some with suspicion. Some with the cautious, measured gaze of those wondering if she was just another privileged rebel who'd retreat when the storm got too loud. But Ava had made her choice. She knew now what Marla meant when she said you couldn't unsee the truth. It clung to you, sat in your chest like a weight, and every breath you took without acting on it made you complicit. That evening, Marla summoned Ava to the one place she'd avoided for years. The neighborhood church basement where, decades earlier, a teenage Marla Davis had run her first underground clinic. It was quiet now, candles flickering against old brick walls, mismatched chairs arranged in a rough circle. A gathering was already underway when Ava arrived. Not reporters, not lawyers, community elders, factory workers, janitors, street medics. People who had lived beneath the weight of families like hers for generations. And in the center of the room, an old woman named Miss Effie, skin like polished onyx, eyes sharp as broken glass. She's here, Effie rasped, her voice like rough paper. Ava stepped forward. This one, Effie went on, has Whitmore blood in her veins, but she spilled it on our floor and dared to call herself kin. That's no small thing. The room was silent. Ava cleared her throat, every word heavier than she expected. I didn't come here to be thanked, she began, or forgiven. I came because I know the damage my family caused won't be undone by a press release, and because I don't want the fight to end at Whitmore's doorstep. There are 100 others like him out there. Marla watched from the back, her expression unreadable. Ava continued, I have resources, access, leverage. But none of it means anything unless it's put in your hands. I'm asking you to tell me how to help. There was a long, taut silence. Then Jamal spoke. Start by shutting down the other factories, the ones still running overnight shifts. Another voice. Fund legal representation for those ICE detainees from last week. A woman. You've got city officials by the throat now. Force policy changes, clinics, housing rights, no more charity, no more photo ops. Ava's pulse quickened. Yes, she said, all of it. And for the first time, the room's wariness began to fracture. Not trust. That would take years. but a sliver of space. A chance. Miss Effie grunted. "We'll hold you to it, girl." "You should," Ava replied. Later, as the room cleared and the last of the candles burned low, Marla approached. "You still sure about this?" she asked. Ava nodded. "I don't want to be a Whitmore anymore." Marla's gaze held hers. "Then stop acting like one." Ava let out a breath that felt like she'd been holding it for years. "I will." Marla extended a hand. Not the cautious distance of employer and servant, not even the solidarity of temporary allies, but something closer to family. Ava took it. Outside, the city buzzed with the new pulse of an uprising Ava knew wouldn't die down this time, not if she had anything to do with it. The morning of the reckoning arrived not with fanfare, but with a humid stillness that made the air feel thick and strange. The city seemed to hold its breath, sensing something tectonic about to shift. Ava woke in a modest apartment in Harlem, not her penthouse, not some five-star suite. The tiny third-floor walk-up belonged to an old friend of Marla's, a safe space tucked between a barbershop and a bodega where no one called her Miss Whitmore, where she was just Ava. Ava pulled on plain jeans and a t-shirt, the silk and tailored blouses of her old life long abandoned. She left her phone untouched on the nightstand. Today wasn't about tweets or statements, it was about actions. By noon, Marla picked her up in a battered pickup truck, a relic from the 90s that coughed thick exhaust into the humid air. "You sure you want to do this in person?" Marla asked as they pulled onto a side street near Whitmore Industries headquarters. "I want them to see me when it falls," Ava replied. And fall it would. In the back seat sat thick manila folders, each marked with a name: CEOs, city councilmen, real estate moguls, the old guard, people who'd built fortunes siphoning life from the neighborhoods outside their office windows. Today, those names would be handed to federal prosecutors, labor rights attorneys, and every major media outlet on the eastern seaboard. But the real storm was happening at the Whitmore estate. Gerald had called a private emergency gathering, not the polished galas of old, but a war room meeting of the city's most entrenched families. Ava knew the playbook: damage control, deniability, buyouts, silence the press, threaten the leakers, break the momentum before it reached courts or Congress. But not this time. At precisely 2 p.m., as planned, the doors to the Whitmore ballroom burst open. Ava stepped inside with Marla at her side and a small contingent of factory workers and former clinic patients behind them. Security hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Gerald rose from his chair at the head of the long oak table. "You have no place here," he spat. "I own this place," Ava said evenly, "and today I'm taking it apart." She threw a thick folder onto the table. Inside, transaction records, bribes, forged inspection reports. A paper trail so damning it turned even seasoned old money faces pale. "Your dynasty's dead," Ava told the room. "The clinics you shut down? They're reopening with or without your permits. The factories? Shuttered by morning. And every one of you with your name on those donation ledgers. You'll be answering for it." One of the old men, Arthur Hillman, who ran half the city's private schools, scoffed. "You think a tantrum and a few press leaks will scare us? We built this city." Ava smiled coldly. "Then it's about time it was taken back." At that moment, Marcus Hayes appeared at the doorway with a cluster of federal agents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announced, holding up a warrant, "this is no longer your house." The room broke into chaos. Ava watched her father's face collapse in on itself. A man who believed in his own invincibility more than in blood or name. He looked at her then, not with rage, not with disdain, with fear, and Ava realized in that instant that all these men ever had was the illusion of control, that for all their power they were terrified of one thing: being seen. Today they were. Marla touched her shoulder. "It's done." "No," Ava murmured, eyes never leaving her father's. "This is the beginning." Outside, protesters cheered as the agents hauled out boxes of files and led cuffed executives into waiting cars. Across the city, old names fell from building facades. Anonymous tip lines lit up. Former employees stepped forward. Ava stepped into the sunlight, Marla beside her. "This isn't justice yet," Marla said. "But it's a start," Ava finished. And it was. The days that followed felt like the city had exhaled something it had held in for generations. One by one, the old guard fell. Names that had once adorned hospital wings, university libraries, and symphony halls were stripped from plaques and facades. Gerald Whitmore, along with 5 other top executives, was indicted on federal charges ranging from labor law violations to conspiracy and financial fraud. A cascade of civil suits followed, fueled by years of buried documents and the testimony of people who had long been considered invisible. The clinics shuttered by the Whitmores were reopened within a week, this time owned collectively by the communities they served. Volunteers poured in. Doctors who'd once been silenced came out of retirement. Marla's underground operation transformed into something public and defiant. The Davis Collective, named against her protests, though Ava had insisted. "You can't erase history," Ava told her. "But you can make damn sure your name stands where it was once buried." Marla never liked praise. She shrugged it off like it was something itchy and ill-fitting. But on the opening day of the new Harlem Health Center, built with settlement money and crowdfunding alike, Marla's eyes glistened as she cut the ribbon. Ava, now living in a modest brownstone apartment downtown, refused every interview request, every glossy magazine spread offering to crown her the rebel heiress who saved the city. She didn't want her face on covers. She wanted the faces of the people who built this city, whose labor made men like Gerald possible, to finally be seen. She worked behind the scenes, leveraging the last of her influence to secure grants for community-led housing projects, pushing city council ordinances that banned locked-door factory shifts, and creating scholarship funds in the names of those who had died anonymously in Gerald's factories and hospitals. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when the weight of it pressed in, the names of victims she'd never meet, the lingering grief of years complicit by silence. The calls from former acquaintances who spat venom into her voicemail, calling her traitor, ingrate, and worse. And yet, Ava never regretted it. One evening, she found herself sitting on the clinic's rooftop beside Marla. The city stretched out before them, a living, breathing thing. "Funny," Ava said, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "I used to think this place was beautiful from my penthouse." "It still is," Marla replied. "You were just looking at the wrong things." Ava smiled, the kind of smile that came from exhaustion and hard-won clarity. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't followed you that night?" Marla considered it, then shook her head. "You were always going to see it. Sooner or later, pain finds its way to the surface, and some of us are born with debts we don't know we owe." Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. "I owed a lot." Marla nodded. "And you're paying it." Brick by brick. The sun dipped lower, streaking the sky in bruised shades of orange and violet. Below, Ava could hear the hum of music from a corner gathering. Children laughing, a world in motion. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. Corruption had long roots, and the Whitmore legacy wasn't the only tree in the garden. But this was a beginning. And as the city's lights flickered on, one by one, Ava no longer saw them as distant stars above a world she ruled. She saw them as lanterns in windows, hands reaching out, stubborn fires refusing to be extinguished. And she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that this was where she belonged, among the people, among the ones who refused to be invisible. And it was enough. The city didn't change overnight. Power never surrenders quietly. There were legal appeals, ugly smear campaigns, and new faces eager to slip into the shadows left by old ones. But the ground had shifted, a fault line exposed. And the people who'd built that city brick by brick had seized a piece of it back. Ava Davis became more than a name, not a hero, not a savior, but a reminder. that every dynasty built on suffering is always one reckoning away from ruin, that even the most gilded ceilings crack when those beneath them rise. And in the end, it wasn't the legacy of the Whitmores that would be remembered. It was the night one of their own chose to burn it down and light the way for others to follow.